Welcome to the Catholic Cafe, where Catholic truth is served fresh daily. We've made you a reservation in the luxurious corner booth, so come on in and see what's on the menu today. Now, here's your host, Deacon Jeff Drzymski.
Greetings and welcome to the Catholic Cafe. I'm Deacon Jeff, sitting in the luxurious corner booth of the Catholic Cafe, sitting here with Ziggy Rodriguez.
That's me.
And we also have Thomas Patrick Dorian.
Yes, sir.
So we have got, I don't know how we're going to do this today, but we have been watching the news and just a lot of stuff going on, certainly within the world, but definitely the Middle East. And always as Catholics, we're very concerned about what happens in the Middle East. Just because things are, we'll just say, they're very connected to us with our ancestry, where we, as Catholics, where the Church essentially evolved from, where we came from, what our history is, and so and certainly Catholics are not. The Catholic Church is never going to be a fan of any kind of war. It's just not. It's just not good. But at the same time. It's especially troublesome with the stuff that's been coming out of the Middle East now. The images that we've seen, there's just been horrific images coming out of there. And so we just thought we wanted to do our part just to talk about what's going on. And I think there's a lot of folks that maybe either, they don't know what to think. Some think very firmly or very strongly on one side or the other. And also then there's people that are trying to take a middle-of-the-road approach and say, well, there's a little bit of, blame everywhere. And, we all, and it's really difficult to navigate. Mm-hmm. And it's really difficult to really see these images that we've seen. And then to hear, painful comments about, what people are experiencing from those who are experiencing it, but then also painful comments from those who have turned a blind eye to some of the egregious and terrible behavior that's taken place, and it's just not a pretty sight.
Well, there's already been for years a lot of confusion and division in the world, and it seems that this is a season where that's really gotten enhanced in a big way.
Well, and then you look at this also, and if you're looking at it from a non-religious perspective, politically, it's really troublesome. Our world right now, it just seems like we're in this precarious place, right? And so we have
a tinderbox.
Yes, exactly right, Tom. And it's like we have all these world powers that are all sort of behind the scenes, like jockeying for position. And there really is. Now, I know every era of time, every society will claim that, like, this is the worst time ever, you know, and the end must be near, right? But you can't help but think about these things with technology the way it is, with the weapons of war that are at the level they are, and then also put in what Tom calls a tinderbox, the hatred and division that's shown up in the world in the last couple of decades, and we're ripe for a terrible world disaster. And I've heard it said that, like, World War I was bad and World War II was bad, which I agree. But a World War III is basically a world ender, right? Just because of the technology, just because of the weapons of war, and the size and scope of what would happen,
right?
And that's terrible. So, on all those fronts, it's a very, very challenging and difficult time.
And it's totally understandable why people would want to try to process stuff like this on a biblical scale and kind of want to flip through things like the Book of Revelation, and be like, where did this happen?
Exactly. No, you're exactly right, because we might be looking in the sky and looking for, like, a blood red moon or whatever these things. You see this, like these signs and things like that. And I'm not saying that we're in the end times, because we've talked about this on this show before, but no one knows the day or the hour.
Right.
And we can't live thinking that today is the day.
Right.
Literally, when the day is, we will know it.
Right.
And until then, we won't know it.
And in any given day, this next moment could be our last, and regardless of what it means for the broader narrative of salvation history.
Right.
And so we always need to stay, in each present moment, in touch with God and the best that we can. And it can sometimes be hard for us to stay in touch with God when there's so much confusion and so much division, and you've got a mishmash of both information and what seems to be a lot of disinformation as well. And it can be really hard for a person to know how to process things and know how to get to what that place that Christians value so deeply, which is that place of, if we cannot have peace in the world, having peace within us, within our hearts, within the context of our relationship with God, I mean, that's always going to be paramount.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, fear is an enemy to that peace.
Yes.
Right. So when we fear, we can't find peace. Right. You can't live in peace and fear at the same time. I do want to talk about that misinformation, disinformation that you just mentioned, because I'm assuming there's a lot of it. It's gotten to the point now where I don't know that I can look at something and tell whether it's real or not.
Yeah.
I get a sense that what I'm seeing that's happening with the we'll call them what they are, terrorist attacks on Israel. I believe that footage. I don't think that it's all AI generated, or there's some claims that people are making. And I do want to, hold a little judgment and say, well, maybe some things will prove to be false, but there's far too many sources of information and sources of imagery and things that are out there now to think that all of it is. Yeah,
and here's something so we've got a situation where on one side there's Israel, on the other side you have Hamas, and I think a lot of people are wanting to mix up Hamas with the Palestinian people generally, and that's not fair. I mean, Hamas is a terrorist organization and has been a terrorist organization from the beginning, right? And they have admitted in the past to terrorist attacks, and there's evidence of terrorist attacks, very serious ones here, and terrorism is never justified,
No.
and Israel has a right to self-defense. Now we, just kind of pulling the curtain back a little bit, we're having to record this episode a little early. And so this is Tuesday, October 17th. To my knowledge, I'm not saying I'm an expert on the news. There hasn't been evidence. At this point and as the events unfold, Israel is giving people an opportunity to leave Gaza as they prepare for a strike. Now, obviously, if news comes out between now and when this show airs, where Israel has done just things that we never could have imagined, then that's different. But so far, there isn't evidence of that. What there is evidence of there's a terrorist organization who has committed terrorist acts. We as Catholics believe terrorism is never justified, and we believe that a country does have a right to defend itself within boundaries, and so that's what it comes down to. But at the same time, I think it is important to recognize that trying to mix in Hamas with all Palestinians or all Arabs or all Muslims, that is wrong. And and
that's why some of the worldwide but also troubling to me is in a lot of the major cities in the United States, you've seen these protests with people flying the Palestinian flag, and because again, I give them their right to believe what they believe and to we'll say pledge an allegiance to Palestine. That's another discussion to me, but it's like what I'm troubled by is the fact that people might think that anything that Hamas has done to Israel on a surprise attack on a Saturday, what they did at a music festival to these young people,
right?
And certainly what has happened since then, with babies being killed and women being raped and people hostages being taken. I just am troubled that anybody would stand up and say, that those actions were good. And there's been a lot of, we'll just say in politics in the United States, there's been a lot of sort of tap dancing around how do we say things without, offending this party or that group or this group that we're aligned with or not necessarily aligned with. It's a troubling time. But I guess what I want to do is just condemn that violence and how horrible terrorism is, and it's just not. It's not something that's justified.
Well, the ends never justify the means. That's Catholic teaching. I mean, the ends never justify the means. Period.
I do want to read from the Catechism, because this is instructive, and I think it's helpful in the section that's talking about the duties of citizens, what we believe. Now, this is not. I have to remind myself sometimes, but also the listeners, that the Catechism was not written for the United States. It was not written specifically for us, for the West. It's written for the whole world, right? That God created every human being and gave every human being created in His image and likeness, and they all have an innate human dignity, right? And so this is meant for everyone. And so I just want to read this a little bit from a paragraph in the Catechism 2243, and this kind of speaks to what's going on right now. So when someone says, well, Hamas representing in their own way, right, or their own way representing Palestine, which this is not, it's not necessarily a reciprocal understanding, to your point, Sam. But if you want to say that what Hamas did to Israel is justifiable based on what they would call oppression or colonizing or occupation. I mean, these are the words that get used. But here's the thing. This is what the Catholic Church teaches about, we'll just say, resistance to oppression. Okay? This is Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 2243. Armed resistance to oppression by political authority is not legitimate unless all of the following conditions are met. 1. There is certain grave and prolonged violation of fundamental rights. 2. All other means of redress have been exhausted. 3. Such resistance will not provoke worse disorders. 4. There is well-founded hope of success. And 5. It is impossible reasonably to foresee any better solution. Now, those 5 things, you can look at those, and I suppose there could be a serious and a longer discussion about whether any of those 5 things exists or doesn't exist in this situation. For instance, number 1, there is certain grave and prolonged violation of fundamental rights. Now, Israel would say not necessarily true. Hamas would say, oh yeah, we've been oppressed and occupied and held under Israel's thumb for a long time, and this is grave and serious. I mean, so there is a discussion that can be had there, right? And number 2, all other means of redress have been exhausted. That one, have there been like negotiations between Hamas and Israel? I don't know that there's ever been a time. I think there have been offers made, and I think there have been times where other entities like the United States have tried to broker a peace.
Yeah, but I mean, terrorism is aimed at like spreading fear among the people. So like attacking the music festival and stuff like that. That's a terroristic act, right? So,
and it's not meant to be something where we're using this as sort of like a way to address this situation.
Yeah, right. There's a difference between like what they did at Operation Valkyrie, where they were trying to assassinate Hitler. Like that was a targeted attack by German Catholics, and they weren't saying, "Oh, we're just going to go and rain terror among the civilian population." They were specifically going against Hitler himself and those who were closest to them. That was a very targeted thing, and so yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, the ends never justify the means, and we could do a whole show just on that as a Catholic teaching.
But notice in that paragraph 2243 in the Catechism, it says that all of these conditions must be met.
All of them, yeah.
I mean, all of them. I mean, you look at number 3. Number 3 is such resistance will not provoke worse disorders. I mean, I can't think of a worse disorder than taking hostages and you threaten to kill them, outright killing families, killing kids in front of their families. Burning and beheading and these horrible things that are happening, and certainly the raping and the things like that. But kids at a music festival, parasailing in and gunning them down, and the hundreds of people that died in that situation. That's a number 3, and I don't think that you can argue and say, well, this is not, disproportionate, or this is not creating a worse disorder.
Right. Well, and it goes down also like taking a balanced view. So Israel has a right to defend itself, and Pope Francis has acknowledged that. We can share a statement that Pope Francis made in calling the world to prayer. But at the same time, he also, as we'll see in the statement, let's just read the statement by Pope Francis.
Sure.
What he said, I continue to follow with pain and apprehension what is happening in Israel and Palestine. So many people killed and others wounded. I pray for those families who saw a feast day turned into a day of mourning, and I ask that the hostages be immediately released. It is the right of those who are attacked to defend themselves. But I am very worried by the total siege in which Palestinians live in Gaza, where there also have been many innocent victims. And then he says, let's see, scrolling down here. Terrorism and extremism do not help reach a solution to the conflict between the Israelis and Palestinians, but fuel hatred, violence, revenge, cause sufferings on both sides. The Middle East does not need war, but peace. A peace built on justice, on dialogue, and on the courage to be fraternal. And I didn't. That's not the whole statement. He said some other things, including that war is always a failure. It's never a good thing to have war. But he does acknowledge that Israel has a right to defend itself. Now, at that point, they're thanks be to God, they're allowing folks to leave Gaza, which is good. And that allows them to focus attention on those, on Hamas themselves. I don't think we should necessarily assume that the people who don't leave are necessarily tied to Hamas. They could just be gripped by fear themselves and not wanting to leave their home, and but they're not pro-terrorist. So we got to be careful to not just assume negative things about the people who are caught in the middle of the situation, and understand with Pope Francis that there's a lot of ways in which many innocent Palestinians could suffer extreme casualties and tragedies, and I think probably already have. You know what I mean? But at the same time, Israel has a right to defend itself, and so I think the prayer would be, we want this to end as quickly as possible, but have it be directed towards Hamas, towards the people who are actually bringing out these terrorist activities that are never justified.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll reiterate that Hamas, it's a terrorist organization. And as you said before so plainly, terrorists, they create terror. They operate in a world of fear, and it's never, it's just never good. Now, I will mention, I'll agree with you, and all the stuff you just said there, I will agree. I don't disagree at all. But it's hard for us. I'll just say it's difficult for me. I'm not an expert at Middle East history and all the things, who's good and who's bad. It's really hard to discern a lot of things, and things have gotten so convoluted.
Yeah.
I do know a couple of things. One thing I know is that God is the one that revealed that the Israelites, that the Jews were the chosen people, right? And so there's something about the people, right? Our Hebrew ancestors, that we need to recognize that God saw in them, the hope for the future, the wellspring of His grace, especially come to fruition in His Son Jesus. Because we all know Jesus was a Jew, Peter was a Jew, Paul was a Jew. They're Jews. Mary's a Jew, and it's like we look at these things, and we don't want to separate ourselves from that. So there's something about where Israel goes, so goes the world, and we have to be cautious. And then at the same time, I want to recognize that there's no blanket acceptance of behaviors. Say like anything that Israel does is going to be good, and anything that Hamas does is going to be bad. Right. I mean, you can't look at it that way. It's not even black and white. Now, I've fallen aside that thinks that Israel has been horribly wronged here, especially in the way these attacks took. But then I'll at the same time say that Israel has a responsibility in its response, and I think this is what the Pope was getting at.
Yeah.
He doesn't. We don't like war. We don't like when people have to point guns or other weapons at each other and try to kill the other, right? But at the same time, Israel, and as you mentioned before, up till now they've done this, but they have to be very cautious in their response, that it's targeted, that it's strategic. But because what I've seen is they have been warning people and alerting people on social media and digital means, through sending text messages to the Palestinians that are in Gaza. And they've even done things like they have certain kinds of bombs that will drop on a building that basically are glorified noisemakers.
Yeah.
That when it hits the top of the building, you know that building in a period of time is going to be leveled.
Right.
So
if this was a real bomb, it would,
Right. And it's like, please leave. And some of the things they've done in terms of like turning off the water and the power. Now, what Israel is saying, and I want to believe them, is that they're trying to get the civilians, the Palestinian civilians, out and to move south.
Yeah.
Right, to stay out of the north because they're going to come in.
Yeah.
And so they've done the things that they're supposed to do.
Right. And today's the day of fasting and today, we're taping this a few days ahead of time. Tuesday, October 17th, the day of fasting and prayer worldwide, fasting, abstinence, and prayer for Catholics. So we pray that, between now and when the time that the show airs, that Israel carries out its campaign, swiftly roots out Hamas and the people who are responsible for the terrorism, but does so in a way that is careful to minimize
collateral damage, especially with the civilians, and like that number 3, making it worse, right, than the situation, and rather than tamping down the problem, essentially throwing a match into like gasoline on the fire or whatever, making it worse. Now, in all of this, as horrific as all this has been, and I don't know if you've seen the images, but they're terrible. As horrific as this has all been, and as uncertain as our future, the future of the entire world, with Vladimir Putin, sick, and there's rumors that he's going to be stepping down or dying, or there'll be someone else coming into place, and the tensions between the United States and China and other. And certainly with Iran, there's just a lot of stuff going on here that could be really, really dangerous. But in the middle of all this, there are still signs of hope, and there's still some beautiful, virtuous acts. Let's talk about the patriarch.
Yeah,
in Jerusalem.
The Latin patriarch, Catholic patriarch of Jerusalem. He has offered to exchange himself for hostages that are held by Hamas. So he has stepped up and made himself available. Say, if Hamas is willing to let go of its hostages, I'll step in and I'll allow myself to be taken hostage, which is just it's a beautiful act of heroism. It reminds me of like Saint Maximilian Kolbe and his act of self-gift, and of course of our Lord. And I'm also reminded, sort of generally, that Fred Rogers quote.
Who would have thought that in a time like this, right, we're going to start quoting a guy that basically had a children's show.
Yeah, Mr. Rogers.
I don't know if the world has paid attention to Fred Rogers, and there's a movie with Tom Hanks about him, and he's a complicated guy, but he's actually very, very, very good guy.
Yeah.
And we could use his sweater right now, in all honesty, right? We could use that coming in and just that peaceful language. But you were pointing out to me that like this quote that you're getting ready to read from Mr. Rogers, it was very, very well received, and we kind of went viral during the 9/11 times.
Sure, yeah.
And what is that quote?
So he said, when I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, "Look for the helpers. You'll always find people who are helping." To this day, especially in times of disaster, I remember my mother's words, and I'm always comforted by realizing that there are still so many helpers, so many caring people in this world.
See, he's in a dark time. That's kind of a light.
All the darkness of the world cannot put out the light of a single candle. St. Francis of Assisi.
Yeah, and so it's just a reminder. That there's a time, and help is here.
Yeah.
Right. The gospel message is here and now, and what we need to do is certainly as a people of God, we need to pray first and foremost. You mentioned that today is a day of fasting and prayer for peace, in the Middle East and a peaceful resolution for what's going on there, and certainly for all those families that have been injured and damaged, for all the loss of life, for lives that have essentially been ruined. That we need to pray for these folks, and Mr. Rogers reminds us that there are, like the patriarch of the Latin
Patriarch of Jerusalem.
Yeah, right. So what a beautiful gesture on his part. I don't know that they would take him up on that, but just the notion that he's like, you know what, take me.
Yeah.
And let those people go. Mr. Rogers is it's like if you're feeling bad, look to the helpers, look to those people. And because what I think he knows that we would do is we'd look to those people and we start thinking about motivations and start thinking about, then essentially you're gonna hear the gospel.
Yes.
And you're going to see the gospel.
Yes.
So we just need to continue to pray. We need to continue to fast. We need to continue to just ask the Holy Spirit in this time, this day and age, help to rain down on us. And I will tell you, certainly, looking at the Blessed Mother, being a Jew herself, right? I know that she decries the violence that's going on in her homeland, and we need to ask for her intercession in this terrible situation. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Thanks for listening to the Catholic Cafe. If you'd like to contact Deacon Jeff, send him an email at deaconjeff@thecatholiccafe.com. Visit us on the web at thecatholiccafe.com. You can also find us on iTunes or follow us on Facebook and Twitter. The Catholic Cafe is brought to you by the Order of Malta Federal Association. Join us again at the Catholic Cafe, serving up salvation one cup of coffee at a time.